Hi, my name is Abby Dumes. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman with a orange floral print shirt and bird-shaped turquoise earrings. I have brown hair in a braid. Over my left shoulder is a red frame painting, and to my right are bookshelves.
I'm Teresa Akintonwa, and I am an African American woman. I'm wearing a red blouse with a feather on it, and I'm in a room that is blurred in the background.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here and for being willing to share your story with the Global Feminisms Project. I'm going to briefly introduce you and then we'll move on to our questions. Teresa Tindle Akintonwa has been an educator for over 25 years with extensive experience in instruction and corporate training. Since becoming a long hauler after her initial COVID infection in February 2020, she founded the Black COVID-19 Survivors Alliance, which was first an online patient support group. It has since evolved into activism and advocacy aimed at helping African Americans overcome the misinformation and social stigma of COVID and medical research involvement. As president of the Black COVID Survivors Alliance, she now collaborates with various organizations to increase health equity through health coaching, research participant recruitment, and DEI advisement to research organizations. So I thought we'd start with where your story begins. As you think about where you are today, I'd like to get a sense of your journey up until this point, and what brought you here.
Okay. Well, first thing I want to say is that it's really, my journey has been one of forced courage. And, you know, of course, like as you said, I started off in my career was in education and training. One thing I will kind of give you some background on is that I grew up in Chicago, inner city Chicago, on the South Side in the 1990s. And during that time, there was a lot of transition in many neighborhoods were being affected by, the drug epidemic and so forth. And I think a lot of that is kind of what fed into who I am today, in the aspect of oftentimes feeling, like I was on the outskirts of, a greater, more powerful society, both as a woman and also being, social economically different from, mainstream society. But I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm an income earner for my household. And, as the summer of 2020 really changed so many of our lives. It wasn't just, the onset of COVID, in February, March, but it also was the social unrest that we had that was a huge part of even why I started Black COVID Survivors.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more maybe about what happened February 2020 on?
Sure.
Experience.
So, right. So, I'm working and just, I was working for a franchise in which I, opened up franchises and kind of did business development and so forth at that time. And I was the only, for a long time, I was the only Black person in my office up until we had changed some leadership. But there had been some discord, part of typical office politics. But it seemed to kind of get aligned racially. And that was something I think that really contributed to me, not looking out for myself as much as I should have, wanting to, show myself to be a part of the team, and to be there for everyone else, and not be, exclusionary. And so I continued to work when, my conscience told me, there's a sickness going around right now. I didn't want to be the one person, especially the Black one, who didn't show up to work or, declined, to go see customers and things of that nature. And so I would say that, yes, I was exposed to the virus initially just because of work. I traveled at the time. I went to customer sites as well as traveling to different states in the Southeast.
I see.
Yeah. And so, it kind of began there. And one thing about COVID, when we first heard about it, we thought of victims, so to speak, or patients as being people who were hospitalized, right? And people who had very visible signs of illness. And so when I contracted my illness and continued to work, there was a good degree of disbelief that I even had COVID or that I was suffering from symptoms, long-term symptoms of it, because the questions often came like, oh, well, were you hospitalized? Did you have to go to the emergency room? And, if you're not hospitalized, especially at the beginning of this, you weren't really taken very seriously. You were just a paranoid citizen, and unfortunately, I was greeted with that same kind of sentiment and interactions when I went to the emergency room. At least twice toward the beginning before summer even, I went to the emergency room about symptoms that I was having. And, they were really crowded back then. And the greeting that I received at the check-in desk was from a middle-aged white woman who just looked at me and she just scowled and she's like, everybody around here thinks they have COVID. And, everybody around here, she could have been meaning the emergency room, but it was predominantly Black. And so it was the community that this hospital was in. And, I was very, it makes you question yourself, right? It's like, okay, well, am I as sick as the others? Should I be here trying to get resources that maybe someone more deserving, should have access to? And so just kind of as, time went on, I realized, or at least I began to feel that, we are not being treated the same. And I have doubts about whether or not other people are, being greeted the same way, right? When they express their concerns. The other thing also was not just along racial or ethnic lines that I felt like there may have been some differences, but also with my gender. When men go to the doctor, I guess there's this narrative that men don't like the doctor, they don't go. So if they show up, take them very, very seriously, and do all that you can to, assist them and treat them while they're there. You may not get them back. And for women, the narrative is often that, we complain about everything. And that so much of our concerns and complaints are, they're minor or they're just stress related, we need antidepressants, to help, counteract our hormone issues. There's a lot of stereotype about women in general. And so I felt like I was being affected by both racial lines, along the racial lines, as well as gender lines, as far as how seriously the healthcare facilities were taking me when, I expressed my concerns, when I went in person, even when I called, my doctor's office.
And was there ever a point at which you felt like you found validation or someone who took you seriously?
There really was, yeah. So my primary care physician is a Black doctor. However, his PA was a young white woman. And let me tell you, she was a lifesaver for me. I mean, during a time when I almost get choked up thinking about it, but during the time, think about this, there's so much going on in society with the George Floyd situation.
Was
And
this now are we moving into the summer? Is that
right? So now we're kind of crawling right from the
Right.
spring of 2022 summer.
Mhm.
And that's when I began to really realize that I was having long COVID. It was around probably April, May-ish that I began to realize, like, you know what, I'm suffering from things now that I didn't have before. And it wasn't actually a part of my acute illness.
Can
Um,
you tell us a little bit the difference between your acute symptoms and
Sure.
your long COVID symptoms?
My acute symptoms was mostly headaches. I had nonstop headaches, as well as fatigue, and I had a cough also. And this cough seemed to get worse toward the evenings, I think, but it would also come on just very suddenly, just as I'm speaking to you now, and then suddenly I would just have an onset of a coughing fit, you know, very difficult to catch my breath. It's a very, very dry cough, as well as I was having some very serious cognitive problems, a lot of problems recalling of information, finding words was very, very difficult. Oftentimes, you might hear, this little meme on the internet where it shows a snake. They call it a dangerous noodle or something. And it was almost to that degree where some of the very basic, words and terms and objects that, should not have been difficult for me. I would kind of look at them, or I'd have a picture in my head and I'm searching for, what is the word for that, And I began to realize, like, this is something else. This is not just distraction. This is not, stress. Something's going on here. And so going to the doctor was one of my, going to see my primary care was started by that. Between that and the headaches is what kind of drove me in during the time when, again, most offices were only doing telehealth visits.
And did you get access to testing during your initial acute experience?
Absolutely not. Yeah. When I had it, I went in for testing, and that was actually the first time I went in to get tested was the incident in which I explained the woman was, talking to me, very condescendingly. And if you didn't have a fever, a high grade fever, along with low oxygen, you were not prioritized. So, once they triaged you and saw that you're basically, there's nothing we can do. And that's what we were told. Well, there's nothing I can do for you, honey. We're just going to send you home and tell you to drink, drink liquids and get rest. And, this is the South. I'm in Atlanta. So, for someone to address you that way, my Chicago instinct sometimes says, who are you talking to like that? And then of course my Southern sensibility says, calm down. She calls everybody honey. She calls everybody sweet, But, I even felt that, that was, I don't know, I guess a sign of her not taking me seriously. But testing wasn't available unless you met those two conditions, or if you were a medical frontline worker. It was later confirmed for me when I went in to have blood tests drawn, and I asked them about antibodies. And I, have kind of been watching the news enough to hear that, okay, if you had COVID, there really is a distinction between COVID-19 and the flu or any other type of coronavirus that was known. And so I went in and I asked to be tested, and then it was confirmed. By the antibody tests that I did have COVID, or that I'd had COVID. And so the difference, I gave you the symptoms, but as time went on, the cough went away, but the headache remained. And it literally was every single day. I might have had, maybe 20 to 30 minutes time of relief here and there, but overall it was every day. And even telling, sharing this with, my coworkers as we're all, shifting and having to pivot from being a very in your face kind of business operations to, trying to translate things online. That also, I think, was a barrier to people believing, because they can't see you there in person. And so, if I can't visibly see that you have a condition or a handicap or a sickness, it just doesn't exist. People can only believe as far as they can see, unfortunately, when it comes to illnesses. And then you top it off, I'm on camera. So like most of us, I have on my shorts, but, from the bust up, I look great. I look camera ready, et cetera.
Right.
And I think that just kind of led to continue, that disbelief,
So you were continuing to work throughout this?
I continue. Yes, I did. I pushed on. I continued to work. And unfortunately, it really affected my work performance. It affected what I could do. I didn't even realize how much it was affecting me cognitively until I had started getting feedback, that, certain presentations weren't making sense, or it wasn't very cohesive. And I've always prided myself on being very well-spoken and being a very confident speaker. And very succinct in my thought process and so forth. So this was, really different for me. And then to hear, okay, you're not just fumbling. You're not just fumbling from what you can tell. Other people are also perceiving the same thing, and even worse. That can take it shakes your confidence.
Right.
It affects your esteem, especially, as oftentimes we do, we identify ourselves by our, what we do, right, for a living. It's not so much the money per se, but it's the contribution that we feel that we're making, right? The importance of our contribution to society is often wrapped in what we do for a living. And so, not being able to do that to the degree and competency, that I was used to, really shook me. And it also kind of further, I felt like it further validated some of the difficulty we were having socially in the office at that time.
Interesting. So you seek care for the persistent symptoms, which are these headaches, and this is met in a positive way clinically by the PA that you mentioned. Is that sort of
right? So my PA, her name was Erin, and the first thing that I noticed when I went in to talk with her is that she listened. And when I say that she listened, I mean, I didn't feel a sense of, let's hurry you along because I have another, appointment. Or you're being, redundant, or, trying to, summarize things for me. She really gave me the ability to think, to pause if I needed to, and to really just gather my thoughts. And honestly, I can't say that I've always, that's not how most visits go. Even my Black doctor, and I felt that he's always been a great doctor, very sensitive to a lot of things, but she still listened in a way that I think was different. And I feel like that connection, maybe it was because, we were of the same gender, but for me, it was a game changer, because my previous experience had always been, male doctors trying to assert that my conditions, they're real. Believe me, we believe you that they're there, but that it may have been psychosomatic, or that it was, depression related or stress related. And, I'm going to give you this prescription, but I'm also going to refer you to behavioral health, to be seen there. And that's pretty much has been a very constant experience with the medical community that I've had, going back to my youth, when I was 20 years old and had my first child. And
that was going to be my next question, whether this preceded COVID, whether this was.
Oh yeah, this treatment preceded COVID. But believe it or not, it was a very long time before I even realized that I was being treated differently.
Mm-hmm.
From age 20, I was married at the time. I was in college. But I remember I had a doctor who spoke to me about why I was there with my baby. And she says to me, just very matter of factly, well, I know it's hard being a teen parent, but you need to, and I'm like, hold up.
Mm-hmm.
And, she even mentioned, me being a single mom, just all these assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
And I did look quite young for my age. Okay. But again, I'm a parent there with my child, and you're, lashing out at me based on you thinking that was a teen parent, that I'm single, and that was kind of like my first little introduction there. That, okay, you do look a little young. Maybe you should, present yourself a little differently. Try to seem as mature as possible when you go into these appointments and so forth. And it wasn't until, I was probably say a good 10 years later or so, somewhere around mid 2000s, 2006 or so, that I began to have these very overt experiences with male doctors who were very frustrated with what they could not diagnose with me, and my return and them just not having answers. They lashed out at me for them not having answers. And oftentimes, as if I was purposely, causing myself illness. I don't know what you want me to do, like these, like unbelievable kind of interactions that you would only expect to come across, on television in some drama, but yeah, they're real. These very extreme interactions do exist. They happen all the time. I thought they happened because I was Black at first, and then I began to realize, like, girl, your gender, you just being a woman is why they're doing this to you, and I began to kind of, it's unfortunate, and it felt very discouraging. It really felt belittling even to realize that, what, I don't really have a fair chance at, going to seek medical care just at face value, because visually, when you see me come, I already now have at least two potential barriers to our communication, as well as, how you treat me, my actual medical treatment. Right. Bedside manner aside, that's a whole other monster in and of itself. But I think, which a lot of people do experience, but I just kind of began to realize, like, you're going to have to approach this differently.
I was just going to ask, how would you describe your health up until your experience with COVID? Would you describe yourself?
Yeah, I wasn't very active, but I wasn't sedentary either. I had good health. I think the only thing, I would kind of have these joint problems, inflammation, in my joints, a little bit of arthritis, that type of thing. Back pain, very mild though. It wasn't, anything that was like, oh, you have chronic pain, I would have these, just kind of here and there conditions where it was usually my joints or something, were hurting. But yeah, and that was pretty much it,
Between the time you started seeing your PA for the headaches, how long did it take for you, or did you begin to feel better, or has that been sustained up until this point?
No, I didn't begin to feel better, but I did at least feel seen. And I felt heard. And I mean, I wouldn't say I felt important, but I definitely stopped feeling like a nobody. This is COVID. We're dealing with COVID here, and we're dealing with long COVID, particularly at this time. At this point, it's long COVID, and so the doctors didn't know much at all. Right. So there wasn't, immediate or define treatment at the time.
Sure.
But what she did do was say, well, let me look at what I can do for you, and what do you, and she asked me, she prioritized, allowed me to prioritize, what was most important to me, not just for that visit, but even in my treatment, right? Versus, them deciding, well, this is an issue medically that's more important than this issue, and COVID at the time, long COVID particularly, it did affect you psychologically. That was a huge part of my struggle, dealing with anxiety, depression, and honestly, it's kind of weird is you could be afraid to die from COVID. The many nights I was sleepless, insomnia, I couldn't sleep. I was afraid to sleep because I thought I might die in my sleep. And at the same time, fighting thoughts of suicide and saying, this is just too much. It's overwhelming. When is this going to end? Nobody knows anything, and I just want to take myself out, and I had tools to do that. And I had to talk to my family and tell them, look, guys, I need you all to take this stuff and, put aside, lock it up, that's how bad it was,
Gosh.
But you can be in this strange kind of limbo where you're, I want to live. And at the same time, you're giving up hope, and I feel like what the PA did for me was that validation, first of all. I'm not crazy. And even acknowledging that, these feelings that I was having, they exist and they are of a psychological nature, but yes, they are very likely linked to a physical, beginning, right? This virus. And I didn't know anything back then about, brain inflammation, those were things that weren't really explored. You really had to do a lot of homework just to go to the doctor. Right. On a regular day, and even more so during, the COVID pandemic, 2020, you had to do even more homework, just to get referrals, just to get, testing done. But again, just kind of being able to have that voice, being allowed to prioritize what I felt was affecting my life most at the time. And then having that consistent follow-up, that was life-saving for me. Because I felt like it's not hopeless.
Right.
Even though, he or she doesn't have the answer, they're at least trying. And they're really concerned about me, and they're not allowing, the overwhelm of the situation to treat me as less than, and that mattered a lot. Treatments, kind of, well, before we talk about treatment, let's, you have to look at diagnosis, right? And so in June of 2020, I started Black COVID survivors support group. Okay. And that was because of these experiences I was having when I had gone to the emergency room. And I was, between there, as well as these different satellite sites where testing, or you think you're going to be tested and you're not tested because you're not, a frontline worker. And that frustration, the disbelief, like, how can you have a headache every day? Is that really possible? Like, yeah, it's possible every single day for over 10 months in my case. But I started the group because there's that medical side of it and needing to connect with other people who understood what I was going through. And I was online. There were some other groups that did that. But at the same time, we're talking about the summer of 2020. So we're looking at, political climate. We're looking at the George Floyd situation and really feeling, just at odds with your whole country, and really experiencing a very collective, PTSD, really. Not Floyd alone, but that was, kind of, that true burning point that occurred across the nation at once. And safe space was needed.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, being able to share your story with others without other people interjecting, you know, with their story, or to take away the attention, right? Or to, you know, invalidate you, or to sit there and say, well, we all are experiencing the same thing. You know, that was important. To create that space so that we could have these conversations. We could have these conversations with a shared backdrop also, right? Of experiencing COVID, and at the same time dealing with these social issues that are going on, and how even that played into how we were seeking treatment, whether or not we sought treatment, and then what type of, you know, treatment we received. And we heard over and over again in that time of the pandemic about people going to the emergency room, being turned away, and then going home and dying. And many of those cases, you know, they were African-American women that this happened to. We all know somebody, you know, there's a statistic that says 71% of African-Americans know someone who died of COVID or was hospitalized from having COVID. And definitely, I saw that, you know, as a reality. So just having that space, you know, going back to why the group was created. Yeah, it was very important to be able to have that backdrop, to not be judged, you know, for speaking a certain way, right? There's going to be certain, you know, colloquialisms and culturalisms,
right,
you know, that we're going to use to talk to one another. And it doesn't mean that I'm this or that, right? It doesn't mean I have an ism, you know, a sexism or racism or, you know, or bigotry or any of those things. But the context of where we were in life had everything to do with being African-American. You know, the stories that we heard on the news, you know, as far as those who were turned away, as far as how heavily impacted we were. When you looked at even, you know, where are those hot spots for COVID? I remember them doing a list of zip codes. And my old neighborhood in Chicago, you know, I grew up in a community called Inglewood. And the zip codes, you know, were there, you know, for being heavily impacted. And, you know, it was necessary. And I think in doing so, a lot of lives were saved. I know mine was. You know, it's funny that you can be reaching out to help other people and at the same time drowning. And we hear about put your own face mask on first, but I'm gonna tell you, I mean, that was so real for me. I was struggling with thoughts of suicide. And at the same time, you know, reaching out to others saying, hey guys, let's band together, you know, and get through this thing, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was the response? Was it pretty immediately met with interest?
It was actually, so, and I found it interesting. So in order to find my group on Facebook, you would have to put in Black COVID. You know, you had to put in the word Black, they were African-American, right? But when it came to COVID in general, if you looked for support groups, you would get these, you know, really big diverse groups like Survivor Corps, and there are a couple of others that were well known. So in order to find my group, you had to be very specific about what you typed in the search.
I see.
And so, yeah, when you think about what it took to kind of find me, yes, it was a very good response. It probably took maybe just a few weeks before people began to really pour in. And, you know, really just, you know, someone told another person. I had a classmate, and this was another reason when I began the group, it wasn't just for those of us who were sick with COVID or long COVID, but those of us who had just lost family members, were dealing with family members who were sick. That takes a lot too, right? To be a caregiver, and people not even realizing you're in a caregiving situation.
Yes, right.
You know, but I had a classmate who had lost like 5 family members in a very short period of time. It had probably only been about 6 weeks or so.
Mm.
And we began to kind of talk back and forth in the DMs. And I just felt for him so badly, like, goodness, all around you, you're just literally seeing your family disappear.
Mm-hmm.
The elders of your family, and just I saw that those people needed support as well. So it wasn't just to get through the sickness, but we don't oftentimes think about the fallout, right? We just kind of think about who's being affected right now. What does that look like?
Right.
And not that domino and emotional effect, the financial strain, the added responsibilities, that come along with other people around you suffering. And I read recently that there's over 200,000 children who lost a parent to COVID. And thinking about that, a lot of those children are Black and Hispanic children. And so when what happens to them, right? So they're either going to end up in, a foster care system, even if temporarily, or they're going to now become the responsibility of family members who themselves are already, in a marginalized, society, right? Who already have limited resources for themselves, let alone the unexpected additions, that come to their household. And so there was, I just found it necessary to open that up to them as well and allow them to talk about, what was going on. I've had, in the group, we've had spouses, they weren't sick, but they joined the group because they just needed to see what was going on. They needed to see someone else say what their loved one was saying. And it helped them to even be a better support, to believe, their family members the first time they told them, and for us to really share what were some of the progresses that we were making. Right. So if I'm going to the doctor, and you and I can both go to our physicians, about the same problem, similar history, but one doctor may say, this would be your treatment. He might give you something very mild. And another might say, we have testing available for, this, that, or the other. Right. And so being able to even share, hey, when you go in, ask them to test you on this, for this, ask them to give you this type of scan. This is what my doctor did for me, and sometimes those tests came out, with conclusive evidence. And oftentimes when dealing with long COVID, things came back normal, but it was still good to know that. And it's also a certain type of reassurance and confidence that you have when your physicians take the time to delve deeper into what's happening to you.
Right.
With these additional tests, with these additional labs and things like that. But again, that goes back, we still had to do that homework. You had to come into the group, you had to look, you had to ask, but you did also see, automatically other people's journeys and use that to help yourself.
Right. And so you had mentioned a bit ago about treatment. Is that something that sort of emerged through conversations that were happening in your group?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Hearing about, certain tests that were being done. Like I didn't know, for example, with the headaches, right? Having, and I forget the name of it now, but I had the brain scan where they put you in the machine and they roll you through, to not just look at, my brain, but to, look at other parts of the, my neurological system to find, what could be the source, right, of these headaches. And we can't just keep saying that it's stress without ruling out these other conditions, right? And so many people, thanks for letting me know about such and such. I went to my doctor about it. Or there was that peer help. That's what peer help is, right? Is sharing your experiences. Your stories are so important. They're not just there for sensationalism, or to keep, highlighting the problem, but they're there so that we can also talk about how we made it through. In the Black community, especially the church community, your testimony,
Mhm.
you know, is often a big part of that culture,
Mhm.
you know, and hearing from other people how you made it over, how you made it through, you know,
Mhm.
through your difficulty, over the mountain, you know, all these
Mhm.
different euphemisms we use. But yeah, sharing led to us being able to equip ourselves.
Mhm.
And it kind of, you know, empowered you. Okay, I know what to ask, you
Right.
know, when I see my physician. And myself, you know, I've always been a very curious person. At one point I taught science, I taught biology. So I would say that I had a certain confidence even and when talking to my physicians, but not everybody has that background, right?
Right.
And oftentimes there is a power imbalance between patient and physician
Mhm.
on any given day. And then that's amplified when you have a difference in education, when there's a difference in, you know, perceived, you know, class and so forth.
Mhm.
And so being able to give people very practical steps, hey, do this, ask about that, you know, if this happens, here's your recourse. And that's where I really began to see the importance of this group,
Mhm.
is to educate the audience,
Mhm.
to advocate for them, but also to give them tools and strategies for self-advocacy,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And then to get their participation more often, to stop seeing ourselves as being on that fringe,
Mhm.
and to see that, you know what, we can be a part, you know, of the main movement, be it medical, you know, be it gender related issues, that you can insert yourself and you don't have to wait for an invitation.
Mhm.
You know, you can go there and say, I deserve the same things as anybody else. And that should not be predicated based on whether or not, you know, I tugged at you to get that service.
Right.
Right. So, you know, that part of the group, you know, the self-advocacy is one of my main missions, is to equip all of our members, our participants, you know, with specific things that they can do when you're not feeling like that you're getting the best care. Or, you know, what do you do when you've been treated with bad bedside manner? You know, maybe not by the doctor, it could have been a check-in person. You know, but what do you do? What is your recourse? You just take it, and I know I'm going to have to deal with this lady at the check-in desk, but once I make it back to my doctor, everything will be okay. But there's still, you don't have to accept that, you know, and then oftentimes we just don't know that there's something that can be done about it. We often think that things have to be, you know, at this catastrophic, you know, newsworthy level of seriousness to think that it's something that we can stand up for ourselves about.
Right. Right. So how would you say the organization has changed if it was founded in June 2020 and we're now July 2022? What's been the arc of
Yeah, we're definitely much more
story?
purpose driven. And again, it started off as a support group, you know, for myself. And, you know, I accidentally got involved in activism, you know, but since then, Black COVID Survivors has been present as a representative of the Black COVID community, and speaking with the White House task force, and talking with the NIH, and helping to, you know, define what would be good community engagement strategies. And we've been in these conversations, you know, that kind of bring attention, not just to the fact that Black people are suffering, but that we do have answers, we do have ideas that can contribute to the work. And so we've been able to, you know, have a voice and a platform as Black COVID survivors to speak with these other institutions and be heard and be seen.
Do you have other folks in leadership now, or are you
I
still
do, and that's one aspect. Another thing that has changed, and that is also still in progress. We're trying to raise up other leaders within the group. There are others who are involved, because we are officially a nonprofit, we do have a board of directors, but there are also others who are involved in, the advocacy work. And we're about to get out into the community physically, boots on the ground, in collaboration with other organizations to bring that education specifically to Black communities, and to, show them the way in a way, or a way, not the way, but show them a way, right, to make it through this pandemic, and to as well have tools that can be used going into the future for getting the health justice that they deserve.
What's that going to look like with you? You said that boots on the ground is about to happen. What will that look like?
Yeah, so I find it important. Again, my background being in education, you can't make good decisions if you just don't know, right? And so, the old adage is that knowledge is power. Bringing community health education to certain areas is a big priority, and particularly with research literacy. So, a lot of people do focus on health education, which I do feel is important as well, especially when it comes to preventative, conditions and care, chronic illnesses and stuff that is overwhelmingly, again, affecting the Black community when it comes to diabetes and high blood pressure, heart disease, those types of things. But one of the reasons why we don't have as much justice as we should is that we're not represented on all levels of the medical system. And so in order to get you to participate in health research, in medical trials, we have to back up a bit and talk about why you're not. And the reason why you're not is because you either have misinformation, or you're making your decisions still based on old information and old atrocities, that have happened. Some of them still even being recent. A lot of people refer to the Tuskegee experiments. We've all heard about it. You didn't have to live through it because your grandparents told you about it. Your aunties told you about what they did, to those people. And, but there's beyond that, there are other instances like during the crack epidemic of the 80s, where mistrust developed from Black mothers being tested for drugs at delivery, whereas that was not uniformly being done to all mothers in delivery, but it was something that was targeted at Black inner city mothers. And so they would have these babies find out, that they were drug positive. And then now we have, child protective services coming in to take their children that are already at home, as well as, the children that they had just given birth to. So there has been a history, an ongoing, type of history that goes beyond Tuskegee, that has been internal and that we all talk about, but maybe, the news may not speak about it, but we all mumble amongst ourselves, right, about the various things that have occurred medically. So going back to the need to say, okay, you may be making decisions about your participation based on old information under old systems. Now, you need to know, what is research like now? There's lots of oversight. There's a whole lot of patient rights that are now taught to you before you participate. But people don't know that because they won't even step close enough to, to a research project or a study, to get that information. Even when it comes to, and speaking of study, one thing also that is kind of a misunderstanding in the Black community is that research means experimentation. And they tend to think of them as being one and the same. And so when we talk about education, about kind of this baseline of research literacy, that all research is not about experimentation. And what you're calling experimentation, you might actually mean medical trials and interventions.
Mm-hmm.
But don't let that stop you again from other aspects, of people understanding your historical experience medically, understanding what you're currently living through, so all of that is necessary in order to let people understand that, okay, I do have a certain amount of power. This is not a situation in which I'd be walking in blindly and helpless to whatever, the mad scientists want to do. But this is actually, I can contribute in a safe way. And I have the right to stop at any moment. I have the right to ask questions, and I have a right to ask that same question again if I still need clarity. And so that's where we're headed. This is what is important to me as a health advocate and activist, is to empower others to kind of help. First of all, let's strip away all that baggage, right? We have baggage, and we have so many things that limit us, that we don't step forward to either speak up about things that have gone wrong. We don't speak up to demand, that things should be better. And then we also oftentimes don't see ourselves as just part of the regular narrative and development and advancement of science overall. So where we're going is, the boots on the ground, let you see me, I see you, and bringing, that education to people through community outreach, and also online. Setting up, learning portals and incentives for people to learn about research literacy. And then also, what are your alternatives when you do encounter problems? Most people don't know, it took a very extreme circumstance with a doctor saying something very, very rude to me. And I was just like very devastated about it. And I told my mom about it, and I think she had spoken to someone at her job about it, who was a nurse, who then explained, what I could do next, and speaking with, your clinics have these managers, right? And they have these directors, but we don't oftentimes know what that structure of leadership is. You go to the doctor, and that's kind of like the end of it, right? It's a building, and doctors are there. We don't oftentimes think about the fact that there is somebody over them, and that they have to be accountable to another board, right? Or director, and so forth. So that's all part of that health literacy, and just the more we know, the better we can make good decisions. And we can make decisions that aren't based on fear, and decisions that aren't based on, myth and misinformation.
Yeah, that's really powerful. So you described earlier headaches that lasted for 10 months. How would you describe your health status now?
I feel like I'm in good health. Physically, I think that I've recovered, I would say, a good, probably 90%. I still have.
I'm sorry. Is there anything that you attribute to that, or is it just sort of the tincture of time?
I think it's a combination of time and being able to have the time off to heal. I lost my job, not by choice, but it was just something that happened. I wasn't able to do what I had done. I just wasn't able to fulfill my duties. And a lot of that had to do with those cognitive deficits that were happening. But in fact, it turned out to be a blessing, so being let go from that allowed me to just really have a chance to breathe, to recover emotionally from all that was happening, to get the treatments. Another issue, when you're working, being able to take time off to go see, a therapist or talk with a counselor. That time they were swamped and still are, and so it was very difficult to get an appointment, let alone, once you get one, to be able to, have consistent appointments and that thing.
Right. Yeah.
Of that
nature. The luxury of time.
So, and that's just, being a second income earner, in the household, very, very important. But at the same time, you learn to scale back on what you can, and you do what you've always done, which is, you just make the right things happen, and you still support your family, and we're not falling apart, and I could be grateful for that. My husband is well employed, but just having that time off again gave me the ability to focus on myself and to begin to look around and see that, not only, can you continue to help other people, but you can also accept help from others too. And accepting help from others wasn't something that I've ever been pretty good at overall. I've had this kind of independence. And, it's just like, let me just do what I do, and do it by myself, and I don't want to involve, I had to figure out other people and so forth. But even throughout this whole process, I've learned to, reach across the aisle and accept help from others and realize, what, there are really good allies out there. And your allies may not belong to all the same groups as you, right? But just as we're not one dimensional, neither are they. And so there's a lot of intersectionality, that we can look at to use as our bonding point and really bring our resources together to help one another.
So it sounds like you do that personally. Is Black COVID Survivors Alliance also in collaboration with other groups? Is it a collaborative effort?
Yes, and we're working on expanding that even more as well. Black COVID Survivors is working with the Recover program that is being sponsored by NYU, Langone, and the NIH. We're also a part of Body Politic, which was a group started by Fiona Lowenstein.
Right.
And she actually, I can't even remember how it all began, but she was one of the first initial people that helped me to see, that there is a work of activism here that can be done. And that even though this is Black COVID survivors, we don't have to try to do everything on our own. We can still create the safe space. And at the same time, you can still work with others and learn from others, right? And also respect their experiences, even though they may not be packaged the same way our experiences have been. So yeah, it was, I would say that would probably be the main group. And if you're may or may not be familiar with Body Politic, it's a feminism activist group that fights for health justice.
Right.
One of my early collaborators was actually Hannah Davis. She was from there as well. And she was one of the few people who had reached out to Black COVID survivors that I felt really had our best interest in mind. So once we're formed as a group, our numbers are growing, and I'm, being inundated by requests from various universities, various researchers, various doctoral students who all want to come into the group and, give their survey and invite our members to their, research site and et cetera. And I began to, feel like, geez, everybody's just kind of knocking at the door, but I don't really hear too many people, saying what the exchange is. It's just kind of, hey, let me throw around the word health equity, and get you signed up on what we're doing. And once I began to really see that as a one-way transaction, I kind of got a little bit closed off. In the beginning, I allowed anyone into the group. And I did, had a condition that you didn't have to be Black to come into the group, but you did have to be Black in order to speak. So if you're here, come in, be quiet, listen, learn, but don't interject yourself into, our stories and to our experiences. Right. But Hannah was one of the people who ended up in the group. And she came, I think what she showed me was that, again, there are true allies who aren't just, using Black people as a front to their work, but who actually believe, you know, in the need for us to be elevated and for our conditions to be amplified, while at the same time saying, I know you're experiencing a unique experience, but at the same time, we also are experiencing parts of this and we can all work together. And so, you know, the fact that she not only did she get participants from our group as part of the study that they were doing at the time with PLRC, but she brought it back around, which no one else had done. No one else had come back to say, hey, here are the results of you know, that study that we were doing, or the survey that I asked, you know, you and your members, you know, to do. And that was very important. And I think that was really a game changer too, as far as showing me that, okay, you know, we don't have to be so guarded, you know, and it also showed me how to prioritize who I work with as well. You know, and that's another, you know, big part of navigation, you know, as an accidental activist is, you know, there are many opportunities, I think, to collaborate, but all exchanges are not equal exchanges. Right. And so that's the biggest point. It's not important to me to have, you know, to just say, oh, look at these 24 people that I'm working with. I'd rather have, you know, a handful of partnerships and collaborations that are very meaningful and give back to my members directly than, you know, to look like I'm collaborating with, you know, dozens of other groups.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So you've described yourself as an accidental activist and a health advocate, and you talked earlier about how gender became more salient in the clinical experience for you as you went through your experience with COVID. I'm curious how you now understand the term feminism, you know, what that means to the work that you do, and if you consider yourself a feminist.
Great question. For me, I would say that the way I would define feminism is not so much, it's not so much like moving toward equal rights, but it's not being inhibited by my sex. And I think there's, you know, kind of a real big divide in the feminism movement. You know, there's the fight against the male, you know, patriarchy, right? The white cis male, and, you know, wanting to kind of level up to where they are is one view, you know, of feminism. And then there's the, I'm sorry. there's this other aspect of feminism, like increasing your importance and your visibility. Okay. And so the way I see feminism is not so much a fight against, but more of a utilizing the current power and your unique abilities that you as a female, or you know, be a gender or just by sex, can bring into society. You know, so it's not just, you know, let me get to here, but realizing that power is already here, and we just need to leverage that power in order to assure that we're receiving the same, you know, access, you know, to resources, to, you know, just, you know, every institutional, you know, aspect out there.
Right. And so do you, in terms of the part of considering yourself a feminist, does that frame your vision for yourself?
I wouldn't say, well, that's a good question. I feel like you have to be a feminist when you're talking about health. You cannot separate the fact that you are female or that you identify as a woman from the work of getting health justice.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
They go together.
mm-hmm,
Historically, whether it's, being on the side of discovery or being on the side of, being the patient or victim, unfortunately.
mm-hmm,
There's been a lot of sordid history there with women.
mm-hmm,
So yeah, in this work, you have to be a feminist.
mm-hmm,
And that's, when I think about who I have to equip, with strategies for getting good healthcare, is usually the women,
mm-hmm,
in the group that I have to advise, and that we're giving these strategies to, or who find more often than not that they are going in circles, about the same issues with their physicians. Not that men don't experience it, but overwhelmingly, we see this imbalance in treatment, in bedside manner when it comes to female patients.
mm-hmm,
But yes, in that aspect, for sure,
mm-hmm,
you can't not be a feminist if you're fighting for health justice.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you did that early on, and in sort of expanding what's included in justice, not only with COVID, but health justice is linked to racial justice, and that seems to have been a part of this from the beginning for you, and part of the vision for Black um, COVID Survivors Alliance. So I think that's such an important contribution, to the work that's being done, and to this archive. Looking forward, what do you think? What does the future look like for you, and then for the group? What are some hopes that you have?
Well, I hope that we can have more leaders who are able to, kind of create these satellites, or these other, localized aspects of what we do. So that, we're not just seen as a headquartered here in Atlanta, but that we have chapters, throughout the United States, because that's where our members come from. They're already throughout the United States, and there are a few that are international, but to really just see other leaders rise up, and who will continue the work that is patient-centered, patient first. It's not about politics. It's not about legislation. For us, it's not about, all of these constituents, but it's really about service first, and service first to, to the patients. And that's what's most important. And that's where I see the group going, is just really being, forward facing, programs that affect people, and people can say, directly, I know for sure that this group here came in and did XYZ, and helped us, and we saw them, and we know that they, had similar experiences. So, and that's my wish and hope for the group, is that, we'll have these leaders and other, satellites that will rise up in their cities, and really provide this, the education and the advocacy, as well as getting the participation and buy-in of Black people into medical research and discovery.
So, in addition to thinking about health equity in the context of COVID, in addition to research literacy, which seems to be a huge focus for your group, are there any other thoughts and suggestions about reducing obstacles to health equity in the context of COVID?
Oh, there are quite a few. Yeah. We need our doctors, our facilities to be much more, there needs to be more diversity training. And they need to also become more aware of what their biases are. One example, there was, and this has happened with several people, but the first one that kind of stuck with me was a young lady in our group who has been losing weight because of long COVID. And she's just, in her eyes, she's shrinking up. She's like, I've lost so much weight, I can see my bones. But when she goes to the doctor, her white doctor, what he sees is, oh, good, she needed to lose weight anyway. you know, and that's something, you know, that when we talk about diversity training, that, you know, yes, you know, overall, you know, we have a different, we have different, like our priority of when we are at a point of health and when we're not at a point of health isn't all built on our size, right? But oftentimes that's the first indicator. So as a woman, when I go to the doctor and I have a problem, one of the first suggestions is that, hey, if you lose some weight, that'll help with your condition. It doesn't matter what it is. My finger be falling off and it's, you know, if you lose some weight, it'll help it heal faster. And, you know, African-American women do seem to have a higher average weight, you know, in the United States. You know, all of us are overweight in the US as far as the average American, but just within our group, right? And so now if I'm going to the doctor and I'm expressing this concern to you about this dramatic amount of weight I'm losing, and you're simply seeing it as, well, you're just getting down to the baseline you should have been at in the first place, you know, and I see it and know it to be a physical problem, right? I'm not getting the help that I need from you, right? And so it's that type of diversity training and awareness that more doctors need to have. And so the advisement part of what we do is important, you know, in highlighting what we're experiencing, you know, and things to just be really aware of, because there's a lot of bias, you know, there's a lot of bias that doctors have that comes from their training, and then just their individual biases, you know, will affect how they perceive the importance and the prioritization of our complaints. So no, it may not, you know, on your scale, I might have gotten within the range of what might be, let's say, a proper BMI, right? But for me, if this is a dramatic weight loss drop in a short period of time, and this is not what I want for myself, right? Then that power back over my body, you don't get to decide, you know, what I should be happy with as, you know, my ground point of good health. But unfortunately, that's, you know, just one example of how a lack of cultural sensitivity and understanding from physicians can lead to a lot of our concerns being dismissed and not addressed.
No, it's an illuminating example. As we sort of close, is there anything that we didn't get to talk about that you wanted to mention?
We're looking to collaborate and partner with others. And as I said, I've come to an understanding that, you know, we can still have our safe space and at the same time really accept the allyship that is being offered. And so I do invite, you know, anyone else who would like to work with Black COVID survivors as a resource, as a sponsor, as a collaborator, to reach out. The website for us is www.bcsalliance.org.
Great.
And you can reach out, contact me there, as well as directly to my email at Teresa, Teresa, at bcsalliance.org. And I'm definitely, you know, open to these conversations about what we can do to help one another, you know, and how can we all get justice? Because really, if we allow injustice to exist for one group, it's only a matter of time before it spills over and spreads to others. So we can't put our head in, you know, in the sand and think that, you know, if it's not affecting me, then it, you know, it doesn't matter. Or even the opposite, that just because it's affecting me doesn't mean that it's not affecting others. And it doesn't mean that others don't have, you know, an equal fight, you know, in their claim for what are really should be basic human rights.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to have been able to speak about this.
We're grateful to have your story as part of this archive, and I know we'll all benefit greatly from from it being part of the Global Feminisms Project. So thanks again.
Appreciate you. Thank you.